On Christmas Eve, I stood in the shadows behind the staircase, pretending I was still deaf while listening to my mother and brother debate whether to lock me in a psych ward or a nursing home first. I had kept my hearing recovery a secret just to learn the truth. They thought I was their helpless victim, unaware I was recording every word. The moment I finally spoke up changed my life forever. My name is Lena Carter. I am 34 years old, and until a few weeks ago, I was a ghost in my own life. If you drove through the winding, snow-dusted streets of Maple Ridge, Colorado, you might have seen my house. It is the one with the wraparound porch and the overly ambitious Christmas light display that my late husband, Evan, used to spend 3 days putting up. Inside that house, I was known as the Tragic Widow, the former creative director of Northbridge Creative Labs, who lost her hearing in a horrific accident and subsequently lost her ability to function in the hearing world. I was the broken thing that needed to be managed, pitied, and handled. But on this particular Christmas Eve, as I stood barefoot on the second-floor landing, I was something else entirely. I was a spy. The house was dark upstairs, but a warm, golden glow spilled from the living room below, casting long, dancing shadows against the hallway walls. I pressed my back against the cool plaster, my right hand gripping the banister so hard my knuckles turned white. My other hand was pressed flat against the wall. A habit from the last few years of silence where I learned to feel vibrations to know if someone was walking or if a door had slammed. But tonight, I did not need the vibrations. Tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I could hear. It was not the perfect, high-definition surround sound I remembered from my days leading pitch meetings in glass-walled conference rooms. It was mechanical, slightly tinny, and sharp, like listening to the world through a high-frequency radio. The surgery had been a terrifying gamble. A procedure Dr. Lowell had performed in secret at my request, and the recovery had been a lonely hell of headaches and sensory overload. But it had worked. I heard the clink of a ceramic spoon hitting the side of a mug. The sound was so crisp, it almost made me flinch. I heard the low, rhythmic hiss and pop of the logs burning in the fireplace. A sound I had completely forgotten. A sound that used to make me feel safe. Now, it just sounded like something being consumed. And then, I heard the laughter. It was my mother's laugh, not the soft, pitying chuckle she used when she was helping me read a menu or guiding me to a chair, but a full, throaty laugh. It was the sound of a woman who was entirely at ease. "Oh, Dylan, stop it," she said. Her voice traveled up the stairs, distorted slightly by the new wiring in my inner ear but unmistakable. "You know she would never agree to that color." "Who cares what she agrees to?" That was Dylan, my brother, the man who had moved into my guest room temporarily to help me manage my affairs. The man who had taken over my correspondence because reading emails exhausted me. His voice was deeper than I remembered, rougher around the edges. I held my breath. The air in the hallway felt thin, cold. I should have walked down there. I should have descended the stairs like a miracle, pointing to my ears, crying tears of joy, and hugging them both. "I can hear you. It worked." That was the scene I had played out in my head 1,000 times while lying in the recovery room at the clinic. But something stopped me. It was the tone of Dylan's voice. It lacked the performative softness he always used when he looked me in the face. This was a business tone. I leaned in closer to the banister, the wood digging into my ribs. "Look, Mom," Dylan said, and I heard the distinct sound of him setting his mug down on the coffee table with a heavy thud. "We need to be realistic. The taxes on this place are eating us alive. Well, eating her alive. But eventually, that trickles down to us." "I know, honey," Mom sighed. "But she loves this house. It is all she has left of Evan." "She is living in a mausoleum," Dylan countered. "It is morbid, and frankly, she is not capable of maintaining it. You saw her last week. She forgot to lock the back door again. What if someone had broken in? She wouldn't have even heard them." I flinched. I had not forgotten to lock the door. Dylan had been the last one out after smoking a cigarette on the patio. I remembered seeing him come in. I remembered assuming he had turned the lock. So, what are you saying? Mom asked. There was the rustle of fabric, maybe her adjusting her blanket. I am saying the timeline needs to move up, Dylan said. Dr. Aris is ready to sign the competency evaluation. He agrees that her withdrawal from social interaction and her inability to manage complex finances are grounds for full guardianship, not just partial, full. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Guardianship. The legal term hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. They had mentioned helping me with paperwork before. They had mentioned power of attorney for specific medical bills. But guardianship was different. Guardianship was ownership. It meant I would become a child in the eyes of the law. I would lose the right to vote, the right to marry, the right to access my own bank accounts. If we get the guardianship signed by January, Dylan continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that my bionic ears picked up with terrifying clarity. We can list the house in February. The market in Maple Ridge is insane right now. This place, with the acreage, it is easily worth $1.8 million, maybe $2 million. I felt the blood drain from my face. $1.8 million. That was the number they put on my life, on the home Evan and I had built, on the garden where I had buried my dog, on the studio where I used to paint. That is a lot of money, Mom said softly. I waited for the but. I waited for her to say, but we can't do that to Lena. It is her home. She is not incompetent. She is just deaf. It is enough to set everyone up, Dylan said, bulldozing over the silence. We put Lena in that facility in Boulder, the one with the sensory gardens. It is nice. Mom, high-end. It costs $10,000 a month. But with the house sale and Evan's life insurance, we can cover her for 20 years and still have plenty left over to start my firm. And you could finally retire to Florida. The Sunrise Center? Mom asked. Is that the one with the locked wards? It is a secure facility, Dylan corrected. For her safety, so she doesn't wander off, so she doesn't get hurt. We are doing this for her, Mom. We are saving her from herself. She is barely existing here. There, she will be managed. Managed. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stop the gasp that threatened to tear its way out of my throat. My knees shook so violently I thought I might collapse, sending a thud through the floorboards that would give me away. They were not drinking cocoa and missing Evan. They were carving up my life like a Christmas turkey. For the last 3 years, since the car accident that took Evan and took my hearing, I had looked at my mother and brother as my anchors. When the world went silent, they were the ones who learned rudimentary sign language, or so they claimed. Though they were terrible at it, they were the ones who smiled and nodded when I cried. I had trusted them implicitly. I had handed Dylan my phone to make calls. I had let Mom organize my mail. I realized now, with a sick, cold clarity, that I had handed them the keys to my cage. I closed my eyes, listening to the crackle of the fire again. It sounded different now. It sounded like a threat. Do not scream. I told myself. Do not go down there and throw a vase at his head. Do not let them know. If I went down there now, screaming in a voice I had barely used in years, they would just use it as proof of my instability. See? She is hysterical. She is paranoid. The deafness has made her lose her mind. They would fast-track the paperwork. They would sedate me, and I would wake up in a room with a locked door in Boulder, watching my brother spend my husband's life insurance on a business he would inevitably run into the ground. No. My hand, trembling, reached into the pocket of my oversized cardigan. I pulled out my phone. I had kept it on silent mode for years, relying on the vibration. But now I checked the screen. I swiped to the utilities folder and opened the voice memo app. I had used this app to record my own voice during speech therapy, trying to make sure I wasn't slurring my words. Now, I hit the big red button. The little waveform on the screen jumped. It picked up the ambient noise. I just feel bad about the timing, Mom said. Doing it right after Christmas. There is never a good time, Mom, Dylan said. But look at it this way. This is the last Christmas she has to struggle. Next year, she will be taken care of, and we will be free. We will be free. The waveform spiked as he said the word free. I watched the red line travel across the screen, documenting the betrayal in real time. This was not hearsay. This was not a misunderstanding. This was evidence. I stood there for another 10 minutes, recording everything. They talked about the renovations they would do to the house to increase the value, cheap cosmetic fixes to cover the cracks. They talked about selling Evan's vintage car collection, which I had refused to part with. Dylan called my refusal hoarding. Every word was a lash of a whip, but with every sentence, the shock began to recede, replaced by something colder, harder. It was the icy resolve I used to feel before walking into a boardroom to kill a bad idea. The Lena who cried in her pillow because she couldn't hear the rain was gone. The Lena who relied on her big brother to interpret the world for her was dead. I stopped the recording. I saved the file as Christmas Carol Part 1. Then I uploaded it immediately to a secure cloud drive that Dylan did not have the password to. I took one last look at the warm glow emanating from the living room. It looked so inviting, so familial. It was a perfect lie. I turned around and crept back toward my bedroom, placing my feet carefully on the edges of the steps where the wood was less likely to creak. I slipped into my room and locked the door, a soft click that I could finally hear. I walked to the mirror. My reflection looked the same as it had an hour ago, pale, tired, wearing baggy clothes that hid my frame, but the eyes were different. The fear was gone. They wanted to play games with my life. They wanted to use my silence against me. They thought I was broken. They thought I was finished. If you think that conversation about the money was the worst thing I heard that night, you are wrong. You have no idea how deep the rot in this family goes. If you think that is bad, just wait until you hear what they have planned for my new life, because I did not just go to sleep, I kept listening. And what came next was not just greed, it was cruelty. To understand the magnitude of the betrayal I witnessed on the staircase, you have to understand the person I was before the world went quiet. 3 years ago, I was not a woman who hid in shadows. I was loud. I was vibrant. I was the kind of person who walked into a room and changed its temperature. At Northbridge Creative Labs, I was the youngest creative director in the company's history. My life was a symphony of high-stakes noise. It was the constant ringing of office phones, the click-clack of heels on polished concrete floors, the aggressive hum of espresso machines, and the chorus of voices pitching ideas in glass-walled conference rooms. I thrived in the cacophony. I conducted it. I lived for the adrenaline of a campaign launch, managing budgets of $500,000 without blinking, and commanding a team of 40 people who hung on my every word. I was Lena Carter, the woman who could talk her way out of any crisis and into any deal. And waiting for me at the end of every chaotic 14-hour day was Evan Miller. Evan was my anchor. While I was a hurricane of ambition and anxiety, he was the solid earth. He was an architect, a man who understood structure and stability in a way I never could. We had been together for 10 years, married for 6, and we were finally building our masterpiece. We had bought the plot of land in Maple Ridge, and Evan had spent nights bent over his drafting table, sketching the lines of the home where we planned to raise a family. He was warm, with a laugh that rumbled deep in his chest, a sound that used to vibrate against my back when he held me. He was the only person who could make me stop checking my email. He was my future. Then came the night of November 12th. It was our 6th wedding anniversary. We had gone to dinner at a small, candlelit bistro, tucked away in the mountains. A place with overpriced wine and a view of the city lights that looked like scattered diamonds below. It was perfect. We talked about the nursery paint colors and whether we could afford the imported Italian tile for the kitchen. We were happy. We were so unbearably, foolishly happy. The drive home was treacherous. A storm had rolled in over the peaks, turning the roads into ribbons of black ice slicked with freezing rain. I was driving, my hands 10 and 2 on the wheel, my eyes narrowing against the glare of oncoming headlights. Evan was in the passenger seat, DJing from his phone, trying to find a song that fit the mood. He reached over. I remember that so clearly. He reached over to squeeze my hand, his fingers warm against my cold skin. "Relax, Lee," he said, using his nickname for me. "You are gripping that wheel like you are trying to strangle it. We are almost home." He took his other hand off the dashboard to gesture at something. Maybe a deer. Maybe a sign. I never found out. He was smiling. He looked so alive in the soft green glow of the dashboard lights. Then the world exploded. It happened in a fraction of a second, but in my memory, it stretches out for hours. The headlights of the SUV coming over the ridge were blinding. Two suns appearing where there should have been darkness. The other driver was going too fast for the ice. His vehicle lost traction, drifting sideways. A massive wall of steel sliding inevitably toward us. I slammed on the brakes, but physics had already made its decision. We were just a sled on ice. The impact hit Evan's side. I did not hear a scream. I did not hear tires screeching. The last sound I ever heard in my life was the sickening, earth-shattering crunch of metal collapsing into metal, the sound of the safety glass shattering into a million diamonds, and the wet, heavy thud of the chassis buckling. It was a sound so loud it felt like it tore the sky open. And then, nothing. When I woke up, the lights were too bright. That was my first thought. The fluorescent tubes above me were buzzing with a visual intensity that hurt my eyes. But there was no accompanying hum. I tried to swallow, and my throat felt like it was stuffed with razor blades. I tried to move, and pain radiated through my ribs, pinning me to the mattress. A face appeared above me. It was a doctor, a man with kind eyes and graying temples. He was saying something. I could see his mouth moving. His lips formed shapes, opening and closing, his tongue hitting his teeth. He looked urgent. I frowned, confused. "I can't hear you," I whispered. My own voice did not echo in my skull. I felt the vibration of my vocal cords in my throat, a physical buzz, but there was no sound. It was as if someone had pressed the mute button on the entire universe. The doctor frowned. He said something else, slower this time. He leaned in closer. I looked past him. My mother was there, standing in the corner of the room. She was bent over, her face red and crumpled, her mouth open in a wail of agony. She was screaming. I knew she was screaming by the way the veins in her neck stood out, by the way her body shook, but the room was dead silent. Dylan was there too. He was sitting in a plastic chair, his head in his hands, rocking back and forth. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. "Evan?" I tried to shout. "Where is Evan?" The doctor put a hand on my shoulder to steady me, but I thrashed against him. Why wasn't anyone answering me? Why was the world a silent movie? "Evan!" I screamed again, feeling the raw tear in my throat but hearing absolutely nothing. The doctor pulled back and wrote something on a clipboard. He turned it around and held it in front of my face. The handwriting was messy, hurried scrawls of blue ink on white paper. "Your husband did not make it. I am so sorry." The words did not make sense. They were just shapes. Did not make it. Evan was the architect. He built things that lasted. He did not just cease to exist. The doctor flipped the page and wrote again. "You have severe cranial trauma. Bilateral auditory nerve damage. You are deaf." I stared at the word, deaf. It wasn't a slow fade. It wasn't a gradual loss. It was a guillotine. One moment I was listening to my husband laugh, and the next, I was locked inside a glass box, watching the world mouth words at me that I could not understand. The days that followed were a blur of silent grief. I learned that Evan had died instantly from massive internal trauma. The SUV had crushed the passenger side of our sedan completely. I had survived with broken ribs, a concussion, and a shattered connection between my ears and my brain. The doctors told me that the nerve damage was catastrophic. They used words like permanent and irreversible. They told me to learn American Sign Language. They told me to accept my new reality. But how do you accept that you will never hear your favorite song again? How do you accept that you will never hear the voice of the man you loved? I went back to the empty house, the house we were supposed to grow old in. It was a mausoleum now. The silence there was heavy. oppressive. It felt like the house itself was holding its breath. I tried to go back to work. I thought maybe I could still be Lena, the creative director. I thought I could power through. But the meetings were impossible. I sat at the head of the table, watching mouths flap like fish in an aquarium. I tried to use speech-to-text apps, but they were too slow for the lightning-fast pace of our brainstorms. I missed cues. I missed jokes. I missed the nuance of a client's hesitation. 3 months after the accident, the VP of HR called me into her office. She did not yell. She did not have to. She smiled a sad, pitying smile and slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a separation agreement. "We think it is best for you to take a long-term leave to focus on your recovery," the paper said, "with a generous severance package." It was a firing. We both knew it. I was a liability now. I was broken goods. I signed the paper. I packed my box of awards, the Lions, the Clios, the trophies that used to mean everything to me, and I walked out of the building without hearing the door latch behind me. The financial bleed started slowly. The severance was decent, but the medical bills were astronomical. The funeral costs, the therapy, the specialists who promised miracles that never came. It all added up. 6 months later, I sold Evan's vintage Mustang. It was the first piece of him I had to let go of to keep the roof over my head. I cried as I watched the buyer drive it away, the engine revving in a silence that broke my heart. That was when the isolation truly set in. My friends, the people who had toasted champagne with me at galas, stopped calling. It was too hard to communicate with me. Texting was tedious. They didn't know how to act around the new Lena. So I retreated. I stopped going out. I stopped trying to read lips at the grocery store because it was humiliating to ask the cashier to repeat herself 4 times. I sat in my living room, surrounded by Evan's sketches, and I started talking to him in my head. "Evan, I don't know how to do the taxes. Evan, the roof is leaking in the guest room. Evan, I can't hear the birds anymore." His voice in my mind was the only sound I had left. It was a ghost, a memory of a sound, but it kept me from going completely insane. And that was when my family stepped in. My mother and Dylan. They appeared like saviors in the midst of my drowning. They brought casseroles. They handled the insurance adjusters. They sat on my couch and moved their lips. And when I couldn't understand, they wrote notes on yellow legal pads. "We are here for you. Let Dylan handle the bank. You just rest." I looked at them with tears in my eyes, overwhelmed with gratitude. I thought, thank God I am not alone. Thank God I have family. I sat in the corner of the living room, wrapped in Evan's old sweater, watching them talk to each other. I saw my mother laugh. I saw Dylan gesture animatedly. I couldn't hear a word they were saying, but I imagined they were discussing how to help me heal. I imagined they were saying, "Poor Lena, we have to make sure she's okay." I was so naive. I was so desperate for love that I mistook their hushed conversations for concern. I watched their lips move, and I filled in the blanks with kindness. I did not know then that silence is the perfect cover for a conspiracy. I did not know that while I was mourning the love of my life, they were calculating the value of his legacy. Now, sitting in the dark of my bedroom with my hearing restored, looking back at that fragile, broken woman I used to be, I feel a different kind of pain. It is not grief anymore. It is a cold, hard rage. Because I realized that for 3 years, I wasn't just deaf to the world, I was deaf to the truth. And tonight, the truth had finally screamed its way back into my life. The months following the funeral were a strange, blurry haze of silence. My house, the one Evan and I had designed with such hope, transformed into a museum of a life that no longer existed. I left his toothbrush in the ceramic holder by the sink. His reading glasses remained folded on the nightstand, gathering a fine layer of dust. His shoes were still kicked off by the back door, exactly where he had left them the night we went to that anniversary dinner. I walked around these objects like a curator, terrified that if I moved anything, the last vibrations of his existence would vanish forever. In this vacuum of sound and purpose, my family did not just step in. They seeped in. It was a slow, gradual invasion that felt less like a hostile takeover and more like a warm blanket being wrapped around shivering shoulders. It started with a suggestion from my mother. She sat at my kitchen table one Tuesday morning. Her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She placed a hand over mine and articulated her words with exaggerated slowness so I could read her lips. "You cannot be here alone. Lina, it is not safe. What if you fall? What if the fire alarm goes off and you do not hear it?" Her eyes were wide with a fear that looked genuine. At the time, I thought she was worried about my safety. Now, I wonder if she was worried about losing control of the asset. "Let Dylan stay for a while," she proposed. "Just until you get your feet under you." Dylan, my older brother. To understand why this was surprising, you have to know the Dylan of before. He was 36 years old and had never held a job for longer than 18 months. He was the guy who had big ideas for startups that always required a $10,000 loan from our parents, which never got repaid. He was the guy who showed up to Thanksgiving dinner late and hungover. The idea of Dylan taking care of anyone, let alone a grieving, deaf widow, was laughable. But grief makes you desperate for stability, and silence makes you desperate for connection. So, Dylan moved into the guest room downstairs, and to my absolute shock, the Dylan who showed up was not the slacker I remembered. He was organized. He was proactive. He was, for the first time in his life, a man with a mission. He started with the phone. I could not hear it ring. Obviously, the vibrating alert startled me, and trying to communicate via text with insurance adjusters and lawyers was a nightmare of misunderstandings. One afternoon, Dylan gently took my iPhone from my hand. "Let me be your ears, Lina," he said, tapping his chest. "I will filter everything. You do not need the stress of dealing with these people. I will tell you what is important." It felt like a relief. A massive, crushing weight lifted off my chest. I unlocked the phone and handed it to him. I did not realize then that I was handing him my only lifeline to the outside world. From that day on, my phone lived in his pocket. He bought me a tablet to play games on and read books, but the communication apps were logged out for my peace of mind. Next came the system. Dylan went to an office supply store and came back with a giant magnetic whiteboard. He drilled it into the wall of my kitchen, right next to the fridge where Evan used to hang our travel photos. He drew a grid with colored markers. Medical appointments, blue, legal, red, house. Maintenance, green. It looked professional. It looked like he cared. Every morning, he would point to the board and walk me through the day. "Today, we have the estate lawyer at 2 p.m., he would mouth. "I will drive." He was efficient. He made the calls. He argued with the billing departments. He drove me to the grocery store and navigated the cart while I walked behind him, feeling like a ghost haunting my own errands. Then came the money. It happened about 2 months after he moved in. We were sitting at the dining table, surrounded by stacks of envelopes, medical bills, mortgage statements, funeral costs. The numbers were dizzying. My severance pay was sitting in my personal account, but the joint account I shared with Evan, the one with our savings for the dream house build, was frozen in a weird probate limbo that required constant attention. Dylan slid a form across the table. "It is too hard for you to go to the bank and read lips through the glass partition," he said, his face the picture of brotherly concern. "If you add me as a signatory, just temporarily, I can go down there and handle the transfers. I can make sure the mortgage gets paid on time so you do not lose the house." So you do not lose the house. That was the trigger phrase. The house was all I had left of Evan. The fear of losing it was a cold knot in my stomach. I looked at the form. It gave Dylan full access to manage the funds. A small voice in the back of my head, the voice of the old Lina, the creative director who managed $500,000 budgets, whispered that this was a bad idea. You never give anyone full access. But the old Lina was gone. The new Lina was tired. The new Lina couldn't hear the bank teller's questions. I picked up the pen and signed. Dylan smiled, a tight, satisfied expression that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He patted my hand. "I have got this, sis. You just rest." And rest I did, or rather, I withered. My mother played her part in this soft confinement perfectly. She became the town crier of my tragedy. I would see her on the phone in the living room. Her face contorted in a performance of grief. I could not hear her. But later, when cousins or aunts would send cards, which Dylan opened and summarized for me, the tone was always the same: pity for the invalid. "Your mom says you are having a hard time distinguishing reality," my Aunt Sarah wrote in a card. "It is okay to let go, honey." Distinguishing reality? I frowned when I read that. I was deaf, not delusional. When I asked Mom about it, she just waved her hand and mouthed, "She misunderstood. You know how she is." But the most insidious part was the physical restriction. I had always been a runner. Before the accident, I ran 5 miles every morning. About 4 months in, when my ribs had finally healed, I laced up my sneakers. I needed to feel the air in my lungs. I needed to see the sky without a window frame around it. Dylan was at the door before I could turn the handle. He blocked my path, his face stern. "Where are you going?" "Running," I signed. I had been teaching myself ASL from YouTube videos on the tablet, though he refused to learn more than the basics. "You can't," he said, shaking his head vigorously. "Lena, you can't hear. You can't hear a car coming up behind you. You can't hear a dog attacking. Someone could grab you, and you wouldn't even know they were there until it was too late." "I will stay on the sidewalk," I said, my voice sounding strange and foreign to my own ears, or rather, the vibration of it did. "No," he said, locking the deadbolt and putting the key in his pocket. "It is too dangerous. Mom would have a heart attack if she knew you were trying to go out alone. Do not be selfish." Selfish? That word stopped me cold. I was already a burden. I was already the broken widow taking up everyone's time and money. The last thing I wanted to be was selfish. So I took off my sneakers. I went back to the living room and walked on the treadmill in the basement, staring at a blank concrete wall. The world outside began to shrink. The neighbors, people I had known for years, stopped coming by. Mrs. Gable next door, who used to bring me zucchini bread, disappeared from my life. "Does Mrs. Gable ever ask about me?" I asked Dylan one day, writing the question on the whiteboard. He sighed, looking burdened. "I talk to her. Lena, she's busy with her grandkids. And honestly, people feel awkward. They do not know how to talk to you. It makes them uncomfortable." It was a knife to the heart. I make them uncomfortable. So I stopped asking. I stopped looking out the window hoping to see a friendly face. I accepted that I was a source of discomfort, a problem to be solved, a mess to be hidden away. I did not know then that Mrs. Gable had come to the door 3 times with casseroles and notes, and Dylan had turned her away, telling her I was having a severe episode and couldn't see anyone. I did not know that my former assistant at Northbridge had called Dylan 5 times to ask if she could visit, and he had told her I was too depressed and didn't want to be reminded of my old job. I was living in a fishbowl. The water was clean. The temperature was regulated. I was fed and sheltered, but the glass was thick, and the people staring in at me, my mother, my brother, were distorted monsters masking themselves as caretakers. By the time Christmas rolled around that year, almost 3 years after the accident, I had become exactly what they wanted: a docile, silent ghost in her own home, grateful for the crumbs of attention they threw my way, completely unaware that the hand feeding me was also the hand turning the lock. But even a fish in a bowl notices when the water starts to get dirty, and thanks to Dr. Lowell and a surgery they knew nothing about, I was about to break the glass. The brochure appeared on the kitchen counter on a Tuesday morning in October, bright and glossy against the dark granite. It was for the Lowell Institute for Auditory Restoration. Dylan had put it there, right next to my morning cup of tea. "I did some digging," he signed, his movements choppy and imprecise. "New doctor, experimental, in Denver." I looked at him, surprised, for the last year. Dylan had been more focused on managing my limitations than trying to fix them. He seemed content with the status quo. Him as the voice, me as the silent passenger, But as I flipped through the pamphlet, reading about Dr. Harper Lowell and her work with severe nerve trauma, I saw a flicker of something in Dylan's eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. It wasn't hope, it was calculation. Dr. Lowell was not like the other specialists I had seen. She was young, sharp-featured, and radiated an intensity that made the air in her office feel charged. She did not look at Dylan when she spoke. She looked directly at me, even though she knew I could not hear her. She waited for the hospital interpreter, a woman I had insisted on requesting, despite Dylan's annoyance, to sign her words before continuing. "The procedure is called neural bridging," the interpreter signed, her hands moving fluidly. "We do not just repair the nerve, we bypass the scar tissue entirely. We use a synthetic graft to reconnect the cochlea to the brainstem. It is aggressive, it is invasive, but in cases like yours, where the cochlea itself is intact but the pathway is severed, it has a 60% success rate." 60%. I stared at the interpreter's hands. 60% was not a guarantee. It was a coin flip with a slightly weighted edge, but after 3 years of absolute silence, 60% felt like a winning lottery ticket. I looked at Dylan. He was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, talking rapidly to Dr. Lowell. I watched the interpreter to see what he was saying. "What is the out-of-pocket maximum on this?" the interpreter signed, translating Dylan's words. "Her insurance is a PPO, but I know experimental codes can be tricky. If we need to liquidate some assets to cover the deductible, I need to know the timeline." "We can discuss billing later," Dr. Lowell replied, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I am more concerned with whether Lena is a candidate psychologically. This surgery changes the world overnight. It can be traumatic." "She is tough," Dylan said, waving a hand dismissively in my direction. "She just wants her life back, and obviously, the cost is a factor. We need to make sure the settlement money is used efficiently." I sat back, feeling a cold draft that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Settlement money, that was it. He viewed my potential recovery as a line item on a spreadsheet. If I could hear, maybe I would be less high maintenance, or maybe he was just worried that a $100,000 surgery would eat into the inheritance he was already mentally spending. The testing phase began 2 weeks later. It was a grueling marathon of MRI scans, CT scans, and balance tests that left me nauseous and dizzy. Through it all, Dylan was my shadow. He sat in the waiting rooms. He stood in the corner of the exam rooms. When the technicians asked questions, he would answer before I could even raise my hands to sign. "She gets headaches in the morning," he would say. "She is anxious about anesthesia," he would add. I watched him curate my medical history, painting a portrait of a woman who was frailer and more dependent than I actually felt. I started to wonder, was he protecting me, or was he managing the narrative? The breaking point came during the psychological evaluation. The hospital required it to ensure I wouldn't have a psychotic break if the silence was suddenly shattered. Dr. Lowell had arranged for a private session, but Dylan had insisted on coming in for moral support. The psychologist, a soft-spoken man, asked about my support system. "I have my brother," I signed, "and my mother." "Does she have independent hobbies?" the psychologist asked Dylan. Dylan smiled, that charming, sad brother smile. "Not really. Since the accident, she mostly stays in her room. She is very fragile. We try not to overwhelm her." I watched the interpreter sign fragile and overwhelm. A spark of anger ignited in my gut. I wasn't fragile. I was bored. I was isolated. I stayed in my room because every time I tried to leave, they told me the world was too dangerous for a deaf woman. I looked at Dr. Lowell, who was observing from the corner. Her eyes met mine. There was a knowing look there, a recognition of the dynamic playing out in the room. 2 days later, I went back for a final consultation. This time, I did something I had not done in 3 years. I drove myself. I told Dylan I was just going to the pharmacy and that he didn't need to come. He hesitated. Looking at his watch, he had a golf game scheduled, a luxury he afforded himself with the stipend he paid himself from my accounts. "Fine," he said, "but text me when you get there. and do not go anywhere else. I drove straight to Dr. Lowell's office. I had requested a specific appointment time through the patient portal, bypassing Dylan's calendar system entirely. When Dr. Lowell walked into the exam room and saw me sitting there alone, she did not look surprised. She sat down on the rolling stool and pulled a notepad from her pocket. She did not speak. She wrote, "Where is your brother?" She wrote in sharp, angular block letters. I took the pen, golfing. I needed to hear the truth without a filter. Dr. Lowell nodded. She took the pen back. "The surgery is dangerous." She wrote, "There is a risk of permanent facial paralysis. There is a risk the noise will be terrible, like static, not music. It takes months of training to understand speech again. It is not magic. It is hard work." I read the words, facial paralysis, static. Dylan had glossed over these parts. He had focused on the success rates and the billing codes. "I don't care," I wrote back, my hand trembling slightly. "I need to know if I'm still in there. I need to know if I can be Lena again." Dr. Lowell looked at me for a long moment. Then she wrote, "You are a strong candidate. Structurally, your ear is ready, but your environment concerns me. Recovery requires low stress. Your brother seems involved." Involved was a polite way of putting it. "I want to do it," I wrote, "but I need to do it on my terms." Then came the twist I hadn't expected. Dr. Lowell pulled a folder from her desk. Inside was a letter from my insurance company. Authorization approved. The header read, "Coverage, 100% after deductible." I stared at the paper, 100%. "When did this come?" I wrote. "Yesterday," she replied. "I assumed your brother told you. He is the primary contact on file." My stomach dropped. Dylan knew. He knew the surgery was approved and fully covered. Yet just this morning over breakfast, he had told me, "It is looking like a long shot. Lena, the insurance is fighting us. We might have to wait until next fiscal year." Why would he lie? The answer washed over me. Cold and logical. Control. If I had the surgery now, I might be recovered by spring. If he delayed it until next year, he had 6 more months of being my guardian. 6 more months of managing my finances. 6 more months of living in my house rent-free. I looked up at Dr. Lowell. I took the pen and wrote with a ferocity that almost tore the paper. He lied to me. He told me it was denied. Dr. Lowell's expression hardened. She was a surgeon, a woman of precision and action. She did not like being played. "We can change the contact info," she wrote, "but we need a plan." That afternoon, in the quiet safety of that exam room, we hatched a conspiracy. I would tell Dylan and my mother that the insurance had indeed been denied, confirming Dylan's lie. I would tell them that Dr. Lowell had offered me a spot in a coping immersion program, a 3-week inpatient retreat at her center to help me accept my deafness and learn advanced sign language. It would be free, a scholarship spot. It was the perfect cover. It appealed to their desire to have me managed and out of the house, and it cost them nothing. "We will schedule the surgery for December 12th, Dr. Lowell wrote. "It is close to the holidays. The clinic is quiet then. You can recover here in the private ward. By the time you go home for Christmas, the bandages will be off. You will still have stitches behind the ear, but your hair will cover them." "And the hearing?" I asked, writing the question. "When will I know?" "We activate the implant 2 days after surgery," she wrote. "You will know by Christmas." I drove home with my heart hammering in my chest. When I walked into the house, Dylan was on the couch, watching a game. "Pharmacy took forever," he grumbled, not looking away from the TV. "They were busy," I signed, keeping my face blank. "But I got an email. Dr. Lowell said the surgery was denied." Dylan turned to look at me. He did a masterful job of feigning disappointment. His shoulders slumped. He sighed heavily. "I am sorry, Lee. I knew it was a long shot. Those insurance companies are crooks." But I continued signing. She offered me a spot in a retreat, 3 weeks, to help me learn to live with this better. Dylan's eyes lit up. I could practically see the gears turning. 3 weeks of the house to himself. 3 weeks without having to drive me around. "That sounds great," he said, smiling. "It sounds exactly like what you need. You should go. We will hold down the fort here." 2 weeks later, on a snowy morning in early December, Dylan dropped me off at the front entrance of the Lowell Institute. He hugged me, patted my back, and handed me my small suitcase. "Work hard," he said. "Make us proud." He didn't wait to see me walk through the doors. He just got back in my car, Evan's car, which he drove now, and sped off. I walked to the reception desk. I did not check in for a retreat. I checked in for a bilateral auditory nerve bridging procedure. The night before the surgery, I stood in the bathroom of my hospital suite. The smell of antiseptic was sharp and clean. I looked at myself in the mirror. I pulled my hair back, exposing the pale skin behind my ears where the scalpel would soon cut. I was terrified. I was shaking. But for the first time in 3 years, the fear was mine. The choice was mine. I touched my reflection. "If this works," I whispered to the silence, not making a sound but shaping the words with my mouth, "I am going to burn their entire world down." I climbed into the hospital bed, pulled the scratchy sheets up to my chin, and waited for the darkness to come, praying that when I woke up, the silence would finally be broken. The first thing I noticed was not a sound, but a rhythmic pressure in my skull. It felt as if someone were tapping a tiny hammer against the base of my brain. Tap, tap, tap. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the grogginess of the anesthesia that clung to me like a heavy, wet wool blanket. My head throbbed with a dull, overarching ache, specifically behind my ears where the bandages felt tight and itchy. Then, the tapping changed. It sharpened. It became a digital chirp. Beep, beep, beep. My eyes flew open. I stared at the white ceiling tiles, my heart suddenly racing against my ribs. I knew that rhythm. I had seen it on the cardiac monitor screen for 3 years, the green lines spiking up and down. But I had never heard it. Not really. Not since the accident. Now, it was there. It sounded terrible. It was not the clean, crisp beep I remembered from medical dramas. It sounded scratchy, distant, and mechanical, like a robot trying to communicate from the bottom of a well. But it was sound. It was undeniable, objective sound. I tried to sit up, but a wave of vertigo slammed me back into the pillows. "Easy, Lena. Take it slow." The voice came from my right. It sounded like it had been run through a synthesizer, metallic, hollow, and vibrating with a strange electronic buzz. I turned my head, ignoring the pull of the stitches. Dr. Lowell was standing there, checking a chart. She looked at me, her lips moving, and for the first time in forever, the movement of her mouth matched the input in my brain. I did not have to guess. I did not have to calculate context clues. "Can you hear me?" she asked. I opened my mouth to speak, but my throat was dry. I swallowed and tried again. "You sound like a Dalek." Dr. Lowell smiled, and I heard the sound of it. A short, breathy puff of air. "Well, we can adjust the frequency mapping later, but the fact that you think I sound like a sci-fi villain means the bridge is working." Tears pricked my eyes, hot, fast tears that spilled over my temples and soaked into the bandages. I could hear. It was ugly. It was distorted, and it hurt a little, but I could hear. The next 48 hours were a crash course in sensory overload. I had forgotten how loud the world actually is. I had lived in a vacuum, a place of peace and silence, and now I had been thrust into a construction zone. The sound of my hospital gown rustling against the sheets sounded like someone crumpling a newspaper directly into my ear canal. The air conditioning unit in the corner hummed with a low, menacing drone that made my teeth ache. When the nurse came in to change my IV bag, the sound of her rubber-soled shoes squeaking on the linoleum floor was as piercing as a scream. Dr. Lowell sat with me for hours, running through calibration tests. She held up flashcards, covering her mouth so I could not read her lips. "Tree," she said. To me, it sounded like tree. "Tree," I repeated. shaping the word carefully. Banana. It came through as ba-na-na, the syllables clipped and robotic. Banana, I said. Every time I got a word right, a surge of adrenaline shot through me. It was a power trip. I was reclaiming territory that had been stolen from me. I was planting flags in the landscape of my own brain. Your brain is relearning how to interpret electrical signals as sound. Dr. Lowell explained, her voice slowly becoming less robotic as my mind adjusted to the new input. It is like learning a language you spoke as a child but forgot. It will come back, but you have to be patient with the accent. On the third night, a storm rolled over Denver. I lay in the dark, listening. At first, it just sounded like static, a wall of white noise, but I closed my eyes and focused. I picked apart the layers of sound. That sharp tat-tat-tat was the rain hitting the metal window ledge. That low rolling growl was thunder in the distance, and that whoosh was a car driving through a puddle on the street below. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. My hands were shaking. I had an audio file saved in a hidden folder, a voicemail Evan had left me 2 weeks before he died. He was just asking me to pick up milk, but it was 30 seconds of his voice. For 3 years, I had watched the waveform jump on the screen, imagining the sound. I pressed play. "Hey, babe," the voice said. It was distorted. It sounded like he was speaking through a walkie-talkie with a bad battery. The pitch was too high, and the warmth was flattened out by the digital processor in my head. But the cadence, the way he dragged out the word babe, the slight pause before he asked the question, was him. It was undeniably him. I pressed the phone against my chest and sobbed. I cried so hard I made ugly, gasping sounds, and for the first time, I could hear my own grief. It wasn't a silent scream anymore. It was loud. It was real. And in that rawness, I felt a piece of the old Lena click back into place. The next morning, the reality of my other life, the one waiting for me in Maple Ridge, intruded on my miracle. My phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Dylan. Subject: FWD, Bank Updates. "Hey Lee, hope the retreat is going well. Just forwarding some boring bank stuff. They need to update some security protocols on the joint account. I handled it. Just need you to know it is taken care of. Focus on your Zen stuff. Love, D." I looked at the email. The old Lena, the deaf Lena, would have glanced at the summary, felt a wave of gratitude that her brother was handling the boring stuff, and gone back to her puzzle. But I was not that Lena anymore. I tapped the attachment. It was a PDF of a document from the bank. The text was dense, full of legal jargon. My eyes were tired from the surgery, and the small print swam before me. Then I realized I had a new tool. I highlighted the text and selected the speak option on my phone. A generic female voice, clear and monotonous, began to read into my new ear. Change of account status request. Primary account holder, Lena Carter. Secondary account holder, Dylan Carter. Action: convert account structure to joint tenancy with right of survivorship. I froze. Right of survivorship. I knew what that meant from my days in business. It meant that if I died, the money in that account did not go to my estate. It did not go to pay off my debts or to any charity I might choose. It bypassed probate entirely and went directly, 100%, to the surviving account holder. To Dylan. I had the voice read it again. Right of survivorship. Dylan hadn't just updated security protocols. He had positioned himself to inherit the bulk of Evan's life insurance money the moment I stopped breathing, and given how hard he was pushing for me to go into a facility, how much he talked about me being unsafe, a chill ran down my spine. I sat up on the edge of the bed, the room spinning slightly. I thought about the way he had intercepted my mail. I thought about the way he filtered my calls. I thought about the way he told me I couldn't run because it was dangerous. He wasn't protecting me. He was curating a version of me that was helpless, incompetent, and isolated. And now, he was ensuring that he owned everything that belonged to me. If I went home tomorrow and told them I could hear, what would happen? They would celebrate, outwardly, But inwardly, Dylan would panic. He would scramble to cover his tracks. He would undo the bank changes, claim it was a clerical error. He would gaslight me. He would say, "You misunderstood. Lena, your brain is still recovering. You are paranoid." And because I had been mentally fragile for 3 years, everyone would believe him. I would be the hysterical woman with the brain injury, and he would be the saintly brother who sacrificed everything to care for her. But what if I didn't tell them? The idea bloomed in my mind, dark and seductive. If I went home and pointed to my ears and shook my head, if I told them the surgery had failed, or that the retreat had just been about acceptance, they would let their guard down. They would continue to talk freely in front of me. They would continue to plot. And I would hear every single word. Dr. Lowell walked in a few minutes later to check my incision. She took one look at my face and stopped. "You look like you are ready to fight someone," she said, her voice sounding clearer today. "I need to ask you a favor," I said. My voice was raspy, but steady. "When you write my discharge papers, I need you to be vague." "Vague?" Dr. Lowell raised an eyebrow. "I need you to write that the results are inconclusive, that there is some sensitivity to noise, but no functional speech recognition yet. I need my family to think I am still deaf." "Doctor," Lowell put her clipboard down. She crossed her arms and leaned against the wall. "Lena, I am a doctor. I cannot falsify medical records. That is fraud." "It is not fraud if it is patient privacy," I countered. "You told me yourself that I need to avoid stress. You said high-conflict environments could hinder my recovery. Well, my environment is not just high conflict, it is toxic. If I go back there hearing, the conflict will be immediate and catastrophic. I need time. I need to acclimatize to the sound before I deal with them." I didn't tell her about the bank account. I didn't tell her about the right of survivorship. I didn't want to involve her in a legal war. I just needed her to give me cover. "Doctor," Lowell studied me for a long time. She looked at the tension in my jaw, the desperation in my eyes. She was a woman of science, but she was also intuitive. She had seen Dylan. She had seen how he spoke for me, not to me. "I can write that your auditory processing is delayed," she said slowly. "I can note that while the hardware is functional, the patient reports no significant ability to distinguish complex speech patterns at this time. Subjective reporting is flexible." "That is all I need," I said. "But Lena," she warned, her tone serious, "this is a dangerous game. If you are faking it, you are going to hear things you might not want to hear. People are ugly when they think no one is listening." "I know," I said. "I am counting on it." 2 days later, I packed my bag. The bandage around my head was replaced by a smaller dressing behind my ear, easily hidden by my hair which I wore down. I practiced my deaf face in the mirror. I practiced the blank stare. I practiced not reacting when a cart rattled in the hallway. It was harder than I thought. The reflex to turn towards sound is primal. I had to physically retrain my body to ignore the very thing it had been starving for. I took a cab from the airport to Maple Ridge, not wanting Dylan to pick me up and have an hour in the car where I might slip up. When the taxi pulled up to the curb, I saw the Christmas lights were up, Evan's lights. They looked garish and messy, strung haphazardly by someone who didn't care about the aesthetic, only the appearance of normalcy. I paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The wind whistled through the bare branches of the oak tree, a high, lonely sound I had missed desperately. A dog barked 2 streets over, a car idled at the stop sign, its engine purring with a low, bass rumble. The symphony of the suburbs. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, crisp air. Then, I let my face go slack. I dulled the light in my eyes. I reached for my suitcase and walked up the path to the front door. I was entering the lion's den, but for the first time, I wasn't the lamb. I was the hunter, and my silence was the perfect camouflage. I opened the door and stepped into the warmth of the hallway. Dylan was in the kitchen. "You are back early," he shouted, not turning around. assuming I couldn't hear him anyway until I was in his line of sight. I closed the door. Click. I heard it. He didn't know I heard it. Let the games begin. When I walked through the front door of my own house, the first thing that hit me was the noise. It was not the ambient noise of the street I had enjoyed earlier. It was the assault of Dylan's voice. He saw me enter and immediately switched into his brotherly caretaker persona. He rushed over, threw his arms around me, and shouted directly into my ear, "Welcome home, Lee, we missed you." The volume was excruciating. It felt like someone had fired a starting pistol right next to my head. My new eardrum vibrated violently, sending a spike of pain down my jaw. It took every ounce of my willpower not to wince, not to cover my ear, not to shove him away. Instead, I kept my face blank, offering a small, tired smile that I hoped looked like the expression of a deaf woman trying to be polite. Dylan pulled back, keeping his hands on my shoulders. He looked me right in the eyes, enunciating every syllable with exaggerated, slow movements of his jaw. "Do not worry about a thing," he bellowed, his voice booming through the hallway. "I will handle everything." Then, he turned his head slightly toward the kitchen, where my mother was wiping her hands on a dish towel. His tone dropped instantly, shifting from the loud, flat broadcast voice to a normal, conversational pitch. The contrast was jarring. "God, she looks terrible," he said to Mom. "Look at those dark circles. They probably just sedated her for 3 weeks." I stood there, blinking, watching his face turn back to me with a fake, plaster smile. "You look rested," he lied, loud and slow. "Thank you," I signed, keeping my movements small. "I am tired. I just want to sleep." My mother came over then. She smelled of lavender and old guilt. She cupped my face in her hands, her eyes swimming with performative tears. "My poor baby," she said. Her voice was soft, trembling. "Don't you try to do too much now, okay? You do not need to worry about the future. Evan's insurance is enough to keep you safe." It sounded like comfort. It looked like love. But then she pulled me into a hug, her chin resting on my shoulder. As she held me, she whispered to herself, or maybe to Dylan, a sentence that froze my blood. "At least she won't have to know how much is gone." I stiffened. How much is gone? I pulled away gently, feigning exhaustion. I pointed upstairs to my room. They nodded vigorously, pantomiming sleep with hands pressed together against their cheeks like I was a toddler. I walked up the stairs, the wood creaking under my feet. I could hear them moving in the kitchen below. I could hear the kettle whistling. I could hear the distinct sound of a bottle of wine being uncorked. I went into my room, closed the door, and locked it. Then, I slid down to the floor and pressed my ear against the vent that connected to the dining room below. It was an old trick I used to use as a kid to hear what presents I was getting for Christmas. Now, it was a lifeline. "She seems out of it," Dylan said. His voice traveled up the ductwork, tinny but intelligible. "Which is good. The less alert she is, the easier next week will be." "Are you sure about the facility, Dylan?" Mom asked. There was the clinking of glass. "The one in Boulder? It seems so sterile." "Mom, we went over this," Dylan snapped. "We cannot keep her here. It is dangerous. And frankly, it is a waste of resources. This house is sitting on a gold mine. I talked to the realtor yesterday. If we list in January, we can get $1.8 million, easily. $1.8 million. I covered my mouth to stifle a gasp. They had already appraised the house. While I was in the hospital, thinking I was fighting for my life, they were bringing realtors through my living room. "And the insurance?" Mom asked. "There is still the payout from the second policy." "That is the capital for the new business," Dylan said, his voice confident, arrogant. "And for your retirement, look, if we put Lena in the Sunrise Center, it is $10,000 a month. But if we liquidate the house and the portfolio, we have over $3 million in liquid assets. We pay for her care for 5 years up front to get the discount. And the rest? The rest sets us up for life. I can finally launch the consultancy firm. You can buy that condo in Sarasota. It is a win-win." "It feels wrong," Mom murmured. "Spending Evan's money like that?" "Evan is dead, Mom," Dylan said brutally. "And Lena? Look at her. She is a shell. She is not living. She is just existing. We are doing her a favor by managing this. She would want you to be happy. She would want me to be successful." I lay on the floor, tears streaming horizontally across my face. It was not just the theft. It was the dismissal. To them, I was already a corpse. I was an obstacle to be moved, a line item to be managed. But the real knife in the back came 10 minutes later. "What did you do with that letter?" Mom asked. "The one from Seattle." "I shredded it," Dylan replied casually. "Dylan, that was a job offer, a real one." My breath hitched. "A job offer?" "It was a remote position." "Mom," Dylan said, sounding annoyed. "Creative lead for Apex Marketing, $200,000 a year. Do you know what happens if she sees that? Do you know what happens if she takes a job?" "She gets her confidence back?" Mom suggested weakly. "No," Dylan hissed. "She proves she is competent. If she has an income, if she is working, Judge Harrison will never sign the guardianship papers. The whole argument for the conservatorship rests on the fact that she is incapable of self-support due to severe disability. If she is making 6 figures, we lose control, we lose the house, we lose the access to the accounts." I bit my knuckle so hard I tasted copper. I remembered that week. I had seen an envelope from a headhunter in Seattle on the Informed Delivery app on my phone, one of the few apps Dylan hadn't locked me out of. When I asked him about it, he told me it was junk mail. He told me it was a credit card offer. He had stolen a career from me. He had stolen my chance to feel useful again, just to keep me poor enough to control. "I suppose you are right," Mom sighed. "She probably couldn't handle the stress anyway. She is not the Lena she used to be. She is just a ghost of that girl. It is sad. Really. Sometimes I look at her and I just see the tragedy. Not my daughter." That broke me. It shattered the last tiny fragment of hope I had held on to. That maybe, just maybe, my mother was being manipulated by Dylan, but she wasn't. She was an accomplice. She preferred the tragic, broken version of me because it was easier to pity than the strong version of me was to respect. I sat up. I wiped my face. The sadness evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. I needed evidence. The conversation in the vent was good, but it wouldn't hold up in court. It was hearsay. I needed digital proof. I needed them to hang themselves on tape. I waited until I heard the heavy thud of Dylan's footsteps going into the guest room and the click of Mom's door down the hall. Then, I moved. I crept out of my room, my bare feet silent on the carpet. The house was alive with sounds I had forgotten. The hum of the refrigerator, the settling of the foundation. I went to the drawer in my office where I kept my old electronics. I found 2 old smartphones from before the accident. I plugged them in to charge, hiding them behind a stack of books. I downloaded a high-fidelity recording app on both. I crept downstairs. I placed one phone on top of the kitchen cabinets, pushed back behind the crown molding where no one would ever look unless they were on a ladder. I set it to voice-activated recording. I placed the second phone in the living room, tucked inside the hollow base of a decorative lamp on the side table, where Dylan liked to take his business calls. Then I went to the guest room, Dylan's room. The door was ajar. He was snoring, a wet, guttural sound. I spotted his laptop on the desk. It was open. I took a risk. I stepped inside. The floorboard creaked. The snoring stopped. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Dylan shifted in the bed. "Was that?" he mumbled. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. After 10 seconds, the snoring resumed. I stepped back, deciding not to push my luck with the laptop tonight. The bugs were enough for now. The next morning, the theater continued. Dylan made eggs. He put a plate in front of me and smiled that terrible, fake smile. "Eat up," he mouthed. I ate. I watched him talk to Mom. I watched his lips move, and I listened to the sounds coming out of his mouth. "I am going to meet with Dr. Aris today," he said to Mom, buttering his toast. "I need him to tweak the language in the report. He needs to emphasize that her condition is degenerative, that the isolation is causing cognitive decline." "Is that true?" Mom asked. "Who cares if it is true?" Dylan chuckled. "It is plausible. She sits in her room all day talking to her dead husband. That is close enough to crazy for the courts." I chewed my eggs. I swallowed. Cognitive decline. Crazy. I finished my breakfast. I stood up and signed. "Thank you. It was delicious." I walked to the sink to rinse my plate. As I turned my back, I heard Dylan mutter under his breath, "Gah, it is like living with a zombie. I can't wait to dump her at the Sunrise Center." I gripped the edge of the sink. The water ran over my hands, warm and cleansing. "Keep talking. Dylan, I thought, fill the archives, because when I am done with you, you won't just be broke, you will be ruinous." Later that afternoon, while Dylan was out meeting with the corrupt doctor, I retrieved the phone from the living room lamp to check the battery. I played back the last hour. There was a recording from right after I had left the room. Dylan was on the phone with someone. "Yeah, she is back," Dylan said. "Clueless as ever. Look, I need you to expedite the paperwork. If she doesn't sign the power of attorney voluntarily by Friday, we move to the involuntary commitment strategy. I don't care if we have to lie about an incident. I will say she left the stove on. I will say she tried to walk into traffic. Whatever it takes. I have got 1.8 million reasons to make sure she is declared incompetent before the new year." He paused, listening to the person on the other end. "Don't worry," Dylan laughed, a cold, ugly sound. "Who are they going to believe? The successful brother or the deaf widow who hears voices?" I stopped the recording. I saved it to the cloud. I went to the mirror in the hallway and looked at myself. I looked tired. I looked pale. I looked exactly like the victim they wanted me to be. But behind the eyes, the fire was lit. They wanted a ghost? Fine, I would be a ghost. I would haunt them in their own home. I would listen to every secret, every lie, every plot. And when the moment was right, I would materialize and drag them both down into the hell they had built for me. Friday. He said he wanted me to sign by Friday. Today was Wednesday. I had 48 hours to turn the trap around, 48 hours to gather enough evidence to bury them. I put the phone back in the lamp. I went upstairs, sat on my bed, and for the first time in 3 years, I hummed a tune. It was soft, barely audible, but I could hear it. It was the battle hymn of the Republic. And the war had just begun. The transition from victim to prosecutor did not happen in a courtroom. It happened at a desk in a quiet office on 4th Street, under the hum of a fluorescent light that I could now hear buzzing like an angry insect. I had contacted Martin Rhodes, Evan's old estate lawyer, via an encrypted email sent from a burner phone I had bought with cash at a drugstore. My message was brief and terrifyingly specific. I told him I needed an emergency consultation regarding potential fiduciary abuse. I told him that under no circumstances was he to call my house or email my primary address. I told him I was deaf, but I had a lot to say. When I walked into his office on Thursday morning, I had told Dylan I was going to the library to find peace. Dylan had laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound, and told me to enjoy the silence. He did not know that the silence was my weapon now. Martin looked older than I remembered. He had represented Evan's firm for years and had always treated us with a grandfatherly warmth. When he saw me, he stood up and gestured to the chair. His face filled with the requisite pity I had grown to hate. He began to speak slowly, exaggerating his mouth movements. "Good morning. Lena, I am so sorry for your loss." I opened my laptop and placed it on his mahogany desk. I typed a sentence and spun the screen around for him to see. "I can hear you, but for the safety of my future, you need to pretend I cannot." Martin froze. He looked from the screen to my face, his eyes widening behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He opened his mouth to ask a question, but I held up a hand. I turned the laptop back and typed again. My brother and mother are trying to force me into a facility and liquidate Evan's estate. I have recordings. I have bank notifications. I need you to listen. And then I need you to tell me how to bury them." I spent the next hour playing the audio files I had collected. I watched Martin's face shift from confusion to shock, and finally, to a cold, professional fury. He listened to Dylan discussing the sale of my house. He listened to my mother agreeing to declare me incompetent. He listened to the conversation about the bribes to the psychologist. When the last recording ended, the one where Dylan bragged about having 1.8 million reasons, Martin took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The silence in the room was heavy, but this time, it was the silence of calculation. "This is not just guardianship abuse," Martin said, his voice low and steady. "This is conspiracy. It is fraud. And depending on what they have already done with the money, it is grand larceny." He pressed a button on his intercom. "Send Vance in here, now." Vance was a private investigator who worked on retainer for Martin's firm. He was a small, unassuming man who looked more like an accountant than a detective, which I assumed was exactly the point. Martin briefed him quickly. Vance did not look surprised. He just took notes on a yellow pad. "I need a full forensic audit on Dylan Carter," Martin ordered. "Check the land deeds, check the insurance policies, and pull the court filings for the guardianship petition. I want to know exactly what lies they told the judge." Vance worked fast, while we waited. Martin and I strategized. I typed out the timeline of my deafness and the surgery. Martin advised me strictly. "Do not reveal your hearing yet," he said, looking me in the eye. "The moment they know you can hear, they will destroy evidence. They will claim the recordings are doctored. They will claim you are entrapping them. We need to let them think they have won right up until the ink is dry." By early afternoon, Vance was back. He laid 3 folders on the desk. "It is worse than we thought," Vance said. He opened the first folder. "This is the petition for full guardianship filed by Dylan Carter last week. In it, he claims you have suffered a complete psychotic break. He has attached 3 affidavits from a Dr. Aris, a psychiatrist you have never actually had a session with, stating that you are catatonic and a danger to yourself." I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. Catatonic. While I was learning to walk again, learning to hear again, they were painting me as a vegetable. "The hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday," Vance continued. "They requested an emergency ex parte hearing, meaning they wanted to do it without you present, citing your inability to travel or comprehend proceedings." Martin swore softly. "They were going to strip your rights away while you sat in your kitchen eating toast." "And the money?" I asked, my voice raspy. It was the first time I had spoken aloud in the office. Vance opened the second folder. "I tracked the withdrawals from the joint account. Dylan set up a shell account under the name LC Care Fund. He has been transferring $4,000 a month into it for expenses, but when I subpoenaed the transaction history of that fund, which I can do because your name is technically on it, it tells a different story." He slid a spreadsheet across the desk. DraftKings, BMW lease payments, the Onyx Club, Amazon. Dylan wasn't spending the money on my care. He was financing a lifestyle he couldn't afford on my grief. He was gambling with Evan's legacy. He was driving a luxury car paid for by his sister's tragedy. "There is one more thing," Vance said, hesitating slightly. He opened the third folder. "I found this online. It has been active for 6 months." He turned his laptop screen toward me. It was a crowdfunding page. "Help Lena rebuild. A tragedy in silence." The photo was of me, taken without my knowledge while I was sleeping in the garden chair, looking pale and exhausted. The description was a masterpiece of fiction. It claimed I needed experimental therapy in Switzerland. It claimed I needed 24-hour nursing care. It claimed the insurance had paid out nothing. Raised $24,500. "The beneficiary listed is Dylan Carter," Vance said. "The funds were withdrawn 2 weeks ago. I traced them to a down payment on a condo in downtown Denver. Not a facility for you, a bachelor pad for him." I stared at the screen. People, Strangers, friends, maybe even old clients, had given money thinking they were helping me. And Dylan had stolen it all. He had turned my pain into a marketing campaign. I did not cry. I was done crying. The tears had dried up in that hospital room. What was left was pure, crystalline clarity. "I want him in jail," I said. "We can get him there," Martin said. "But first, we need to secure the assets. If we tip him off now, he drains the accounts, he hides the cash, he flees." Martin pulled a fresh legal pad toward him. "Here is the play. You are going to go home. You are going to continue to be the deaf, helpless sister. You are going to tell him you are ready to sign whatever papers he wants. You are going to set a meeting for tomorrow." "The trap," I whispered. "Exactly," Martin said. "I will draft a document that looks like the power of attorney he wants. But underneath, we will have the real paperwork ready. We will have a revocation of all prior authorizations. We will have a cease and desist, and we will have the police on standby for the fraud charges." "But the money in the joint account," I said. "He has access now." "Not for long," Martin said. He turned to his computer. "Since you are here, and you are competent, we can execute a freeze. I'm going to help you open a new trust account right now, solely in your name. We are going to electronically transfer the bulk of the insurance payout, the portion he hasn't touched yet, into that trust. It will take 24 hours to clear. By the time he realizes the balance is zero, it will be too late." I spent the next hour signing digital documents. I watched the numbers on the screen, numbers that represented Evan's hard work, our future, our dreams, move from the danger zone into a fortress that only I held the keys to. $1,200,000. Safe. The remaining balance in the joint account was small enough not to trigger an immediate alert, but large enough to keep Dylan happy for 2 more days. "He thinks he is walking into a coronation," Martin said as I packed up my laptop. "He thinks he is going to sign a paper and become a millionaire." "He is going to be surprised," I said. "One last thing," Vance said. "The camera. You mentioned you wanted to catch them in the act." "I have audio," I said. "But I want video. I want the judge to see their faces when they lie to me." "I have a contact at a security firm," Vance said. "I can have a micro camera installed in your dining room light fixture within the hour. You just need to leave the back door unlocked for 5 minutes." "Done," I said. I left the office and walked out into the bright sunlight. The city was loud. Sirens, traffic, people shouting. But it didn't bother me anymore. It sounded like justice. I took the long way home. I stopped at a coffee shop and ordered a black coffee. Listening to the barista call out my name, it was such a small thing, hearing my own name, but it felt like a victory. When I got back to the house, Dylan was in the driveway, washing the BMW he was paying for with my money. He waved at me, smiling that shark-like smile. "Good walk?" he shouted. I nodded. I walked up to him, and for the first time, I looked at him not as my brother, but as a parasite. I pulled out my phone and typed a message on the Notes app, then showed it to him. "I am tired of fighting. Dylan, you are right. I can't handle the money. I can't handle the house. Let's sign the papers tomorrow. I just want to rest." Dylan read the screen. His eyes lit up. It was the look of a predator who feels the trap snap shut, not realizing his own leg is the one caught in it. "That is a great decision, Lee," he said, speaking slowly and loudly. "I will call the lawyer. We will do it over lunch, a nice family lunch." "Okay," I signed. I walked into the house. I unlocked the back door for Vance's technician. Then I went to the kitchen and looked at the calendar on the wall. Friday, tomorrow. I picked up a marker. In the square for tomorrow, Dylan had written freedom. I stared at the word. He thought it meant his freedom from debt, his freedom from me. I uncapped the marker and drew a circle around the word. "You have no idea," I whispered to the empty room. The stage was set, the script was written, and tomorrow, the curtain would rise on the final act of Dylan Carter's performance. I went upstairs to prepare for the role of a lifetime. I had to be the perfect victim one last time, so that I could emerge as the survivor forever. The psychological game I was playing with my brother required a level of nuance that I had honed during my years in corporate marketing. It was not enough to simply agree to his demands. I had to make him believe that my surrender was his idea, a stroke of his own genius. On Thursday evening, I sat at the kitchen island, a place where I used to drink wine with Evan and plan our vacations. Now, it was the negotiation table for my own demise. Dylan was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone, probably looking at furniture for the bachelor pad he was buying with the stolen donations. I pushed a yellow legal pad across the granite toward him. The scratch of the paper against the stone was loud, a sharp friction that made me grit my teeth, but I kept my face impassive. I am scared about the future, I had written in a shaky, hesitant hand. If something happens to me, if I get worse like Mom says, how will you manage everything? I do not want to be a burden. Dylan read the note. A slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. It was the look of a fisherman watching the bobber finally sink below the surface. He put his phone down and leaned in, making sure I could see his lips. That is exactly what I have been trying to tell you. Lee, he said, slowing his speech down to a patronizing crawl. We need a plan, a solid legal plan, just in case you drift further away. He reached out and patted my hand. His palm was damp. I have a lawyer coming tomorrow, a friend of a friend. Very good guy, very discreet. He has drawn up some papers that will let me take all the weight off your shoulders. You won't have to worry about bills or the house or anything ever again. I nodded slowly, acting as if I were processing his words through a thick fog of confusion. I picked up the pen again. Okay, I wrote, let's do it. I want Mom to be there too. Of course, Dylan said, straightening up, his energy spiking. A family meeting, tomorrow at noon. We will have lunch, sign the papers, and get it all sorted. He did not know it, but he had just scheduled his own execution. Later that night, I went into my bedroom and locked the door. I pulled out the burner phone and texted Martin Rhodes. Noon tomorrow, dining room. He is bringing his own lawyer. Martin's reply came back within 30 seconds. Perfect. My associate and I will arrive at 11:30. We will enter through the back patio door you leave unlocked. We will wait in Evan's study. The door connecting the study to the dining room is thin. We will hear everything. The trap was set, but Dylan, in his arrogance, wanted to make sure the jaws were clamped tight before we even sat down to eat. Around 9 o'clock, he knocked on my door. When I opened it, he was holding a thick stack of documents. Just wanted you to look these over, he said, thrusting them at me. It is just standard stuff. Authorization for home care assistance, some banking updates to consolidate the accounts. You know, routine. I took the stack. It was heavy. I could feel the heat radiating off the pages. Or maybe it was just my own anger. I walked over to my desk and flipped through them under the lamplight. Dylan stood in the doorway, watching me closely. I knew what he was looking for. Any sign that I was actually reading the text. Any sign that I understood the legal jargon. I let my eyes glaze over. I turned the pages too quickly to be reading. I paused on page 4, where the words, durable power of attorney and guardianship of person and estate were printed in bold. It is a lot of paper, I signed, looking up at him with wide, overwhelmed eyes. It is just legalese, Dylan said, waving a hand dismissively. Standard boilerplate. You just need to sign at the tabs. He held out a pen. He wanted me to sign now. He wanted to walk into that meeting tomorrow with the deed already done, just in case I got cold feet. I hesitated. I looked at the pen, then at the papers. I remembered Martin's advice. Do not sign anything until we are in the room. We need the attempt to defraud to be witnessed. I closed the folder and handed it back to him, along with the pen. I want to sign tomorrow, I signed, with Mom and the lawyer, so everyone sees, for peace of mind. Dylan looked annoyed for a split second, his jaw tightening, but then he shrugged. He was so confident in his control over me that he figured 12 hours wouldn't make a difference. Fine, he said. Tomorrow, but review them tonight if you want. It is just for your own good. He left the room. I waited until I heard his footsteps fade down the hall before I threw the folder onto the bed. For my own good. The audacity was breathtaking. I waited until the house was completely silent. Around 2 a.m, I crept downstairs in the dark, navigating by memory and the faint moonlight filtering through the blinds. I carried a small stepladder from the pantry into the dining room. Vance's technician had dropped off the equipment earlier in the day. A tiny, high-definition camera, no larger than a button, with a battery pack that could last 48 hours. I climbed the ladder and reached up to the chandelier that hung over the center of the dining table. It was an ornate fixture, full of crystal teardrops and scrolling metalwork. I nestled the camera into the base of the fixture, angling it so it pointed directly at the head of the table where Dylan always sat. I secured it with a piece of double-sided tape that Vance had provided. It was invisible from the ground. I tapped the lens once to activate it, seeing a tiny microscopic blue light blink once and then vanish. "We are recording." I put the ladder away and checked the audio feed on the burner phone. The sound of the refrigerator compressor humming in the kitchen came through crystal clear. The acoustics in the dining room were perfect. Every lie they told tomorrow would be captured in high fidelity. As I was heading back upstairs, I heard a voice from the living room. It was Mom. She was on the landline, her voice low and hushed. I froze in the hallway shadows. "I know, Sarah, I know," she was saying. "It breaks my heart too. But she is just gone. The Lena we knew isn't there anymore. Dylan has found a wonderful place for her. It is expensive, yes, but we have to do what is best." She paused, listening to my aunt on the other end. "Oh, she is finally cooperating," Mom continued, her tone shifting to one of relieved martyrdom. "I think she realizes she cannot function on her own. She is ready to go. She practically begged Dylan to take over." I felt a cold hollowness in my chest. My mother was not just following Dylan's lead. She was actively crafting the narrative for the extended family. She was ensuring that when I disappeared into a facility, no one would ask questions. They would just nod and say, "It was for the best." I went upstairs, but I did not go to my room. I went to the guest bathroom near Dylan's room. The door was thin. I could hear him laughing. He was on a video call. I pressed my ear against the wood. "Dude, I am telling you, the ink hits the paper tomorrow," Dylan was saying. 1.8 for the house, another 600,000 in the retirement accounts, plus the life insurance. There was a pause. "Yeah, she is clueless," he scoffed. "She thinks we are signing up for a maid service or something. It is almost too easy. One signature, and the heavy lifting is done. I will be in that condo by February. We are going to throw the biggest Super Bowl party you have ever seen." He laughed again, a sound of pure, unadulterated greed. "No, no guilt," he said, answering a question I couldn't hear. "She is deaf, man. She is basically living in a silent movie. What kind of life is that? I am doing her a favor. I am managing the assets so they don't go to waste." I backed away from the door. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of not kicking the door down and screaming at him. I went into Evan's old office, the room where Martin would be hiding tomorrow. I sat in Evan's leather chair. It still smelled faintly of his cologne and old paper. I pulled out my phone and plugged in my earbuds. I opened the file labeled Christmas Eve Original. I hit play. If we put Lena in that facility, we are free. I listened to it again. We are free. I let the anger wash over me. It was not a hot, burning fire anymore. It was a cold, hard glacier. They wanted freedom? I would give them freedom. I would free them from the burden of my money. I would free them from the burden of this house. I would free them from their reputation in this town. I slept for maybe 3 hours. When I woke up, the sun was streaming through the curtains, bright and unforgiving. It was Friday. I got out of bed and walked to the closet. For 3 years, I had worn sweatpants, oversized sweaters, and comfortable leggings. I dressed like the invalid they treated me as. Not today. I pushed the hangers aside until I found it. My old power suit. It was a tailored, navy blue ensemble from my days at Northbridge. It was sharp, structured, and commanding. I put it on. The waist was a little loose. I had lost weight from the stress, but the shoulders fit perfectly. I zipped up the skirt. I buttoned the blazer. I sat at my vanity and applied makeup for the first time in years. Foundation to hide the dark circles, mascara to widen my eyes, and a dark, matte red lipstick that looked like war paint. I brushed my hair until it shone, pulling it back on one side to reveal the ear that worked, though the tiny scar was hidden by concealer. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was not the deaf widow. She was the creative director. She was the woman who had stared down CEOs and won. She was Lena Carter. I practiced my expression. I softened my eyes. I relaxed my jaw. I had to walk downstairs looking submissive, but underneath the clothes, I was armored for battle. I checked my watch. 11:15. I walked down the hallway to the back of the house. I unlocked the patio door silently. I saw a black sedan parked down the street. Martin and his associate were ready. I went into the kitchen. Dylan and Mom were there, setting the table with the good china. When they heard my heels clicking on the hardwood floor, a sound they didn't think I could hear, but one that signaled a change in the atmosphere, they both turned around. Dylan dropped a fork. He stared at me. He stared at the suit. He stared at the makeup. For a second, the mask slipped, and I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. "Wow," Mom said, recovering first. "You look nice, Lena. A little formal for lunch, isn't it?" I smiled. It was a small, fragile smile. I raised my hands and signed. I wanted to look nice for the meeting. It is an important day. The beginning of the new chapter. Dylan relaxed. He let out a breath he had been holding. He interpreted my dressing up as a pathetic attempt to retain some dignity while I signed my life away. "You look great, sis," he said, his voice booming and slow again. "Really great. The lawyer will be impressed." "I hope so," I signed. The doorbell rang. "That is him," Dylan said. "Showtime." He went to answer the door. I walked into the dining room and took my seat at the head of the table, directly under the camera. I folded my hands on the table and waited. From the corner of my eye, I saw the handle of the study door turn ever so slightly. Martin was in position. Dylan walked back in, accompanied by a man in a cheap suit carrying a briefcase. This was Mr. Collins, the family lawyer, who was about to lose his license. "Lena," Dylan shouted, "this is Mr. Collins. He is here to help us." Mr. Collins smiled a greasy, condescending smile. He opened his briefcase and pulled out the documents. "Shall we get started?" he asked, not looking at me, but at Dylan. "Please," Dylan said. "Let's get this over with." I watched them. I listened to the scratch of the chair legs against the floor. I listened to the rustle of the paper. I listened to the sound of my own heartbeat, steady and slow. Yes, I thought, let's... The dining room table was set for a funeral. Though my family insisted it was a celebration, my mother had baked her signature spinach and feta quiche, the crust golden and flaky, the scent filling the room with a nauseating normalcy. She placed it in the center of the table with trembling hands, her eyes darting between me and Dylan like a nervous bird. Dylan sat to my right, radiating a manic sort of energy. He had loosened his tie, and there was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip. Across from me sat Mr. Collins, the lawyer Dylan had scraped up from the bottom of the legal barrel. He was a man with a comb-over that was fighting a losing battle and a suit that looked like it had been slept in, despite his attempt at an arrogant posture. I sat at the head of the table, directly beneath the crystal chandelier where the tiny camera lens was blinking its invisible blue eye. I folded my hands in my lap to hide the fact that they were clenched into fists. "Mr. Collins cleared his throat. He looked at Dylan, then turned his body toward me, slowing his movements down to a crawl. He spoke with the exaggerated volume one uses for a toddler or a foreigner. "Hello, Mrs. Carter," he boomed. "I am here to help you secure your future." I nodded slowly, keeping my face blank. I reached for the notepad I had placed next to my plate. "Thank you for coming." I wrote, "I just want to understand what I'm signing." Mr. Collins read the note and gave a tight, dismissive smile. He opened a leather folder and slid a thick stack of documents across the polished wood. "It is very simple," he said, tapping the paper with a fleshy finger. "This is just a care agreement. It ensures that if you have an episode, or if your health declines further, your brother has the legal authority to step in and make sure you are taken care of. It is a safety net, nothing more." I looked down at the paper. The text was right there in black and white. Irrevocable power of attorney. Full guardianship of person and estate. Authority to liquidate real property. It wasn't a safety net, it was a surrender. I picked up my pen. I felt Dylan lean in, his breath hitching slightly. He was so close to the finish line he could taste the champagne. "Does this mean Dylan can sell the house?" I wrote. I pushed the pad toward the center of the table so the camera could capture it. Dylan laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "No, no, no," he said, waving his hand. "Lee, look at me." I turned my face to him. "This house is your home," he said, lying with a straight face. "I would never sell it. This just lets me handle the bills, like paying the property tax so the city doesn't take it. I am trying to save the house, Lee, for you." Save the house. The same house he had told Mom was worth $1.8 million. The same house he planned to list in January. I feigned relief. I let my shoulders slump. I picked up the pen and hovered it over the signature line. Mr. Collins uncapped his own pen, ready to witness the signature. "Just right there, on the line marked beneficiary," he said softly. I pulled the pen back. I frowned, looking confused. I wrote again. "What about the insurance money? Mom said I have enough to live on." Mom flinched. She looked down at her quiche, unable to meet my eyes. "The money is complicated," Dylan interjected quickly. "Markets are down. Inflation is up. This agreement lets me move the funds into better investments, safer investments, so you never run out." "It is for your best interest, Lena," Mom whispered, finally speaking up. "We just want you to be safe. We don't want you to have to worry about money ever again." "Exactly," Dylan said. "You just sign, and I handle the rest. You don't have to think about anything anymore. You can just rest. You don't have to think." That was the sentence. That was the proof of intent to incapacitate. I looked at the paper. I looked at the signature line that would strip me of my autonomy. I looked at Dylan, who was practically vibrating with greed. I put the pen down. The sound of the plastic hitting the wood was sharp in the quiet room. Dylan froze. "What is wrong? Is the pen out of ink?" I didn't answer. I didn't reach for the notepad. Instead, I looked up. I locked eyes with Dylan. I didn't squint. I didn't tilt my head to read his lips. I looked straight into his pupils. And then I opened my mouth. "Are you sure?" I said, my voice clear, steady, and loud enough to ring off the walls. "That you want to become the guardian of this useless girl?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical thing, sucking the air out of the room. Mom dropped her fork. It clattered against the china with a violence that made everyone jump. "Mr. Collins's head snapped up so fast I heard his neck crack. He looked from me to Dylan, his eyes wide with dawn of a terrible realization. Dylan just stared, his mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face went through a kaleidoscope of expressions, confusion, disbelief, and finally, sheer, unadulterated horror. "You," Dylan stammered. His voice was a squeak. "You spoke." "I did," I said. "And I heard you, every word." "No," Dylan whispered. "No, you are deaf. The doctors said, you are deaf." "I was," I said, keeping my gaze locked on his. "Until 3 weeks ago, Dr. Lowell didn't give me a retreat. Dylan, she gave me a neural bridge. I have been hearing everything since the day I came home. I heard you in the kitchen. I heard you in the hallway. I heard you on the phone with your real estate agent." Dylan pushed his chair back. The legs screeched against the floor. You You spied on us? I lived in my own house, I corrected him coldly. I listened to my family, and do you know what I heard? I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen. The volume was set to maximum. The audio file began to play. It was the recording from Christmas Eve, the very first one. If we put Lena in that facility, we are free. The voice was Dylan's, unmistakable, arrogant, cruel. Mom let out a sob and covered her mouth with her napkin. I let it play. The house is worth $1.8 million. We sell it, dump her in the ward, and I start the firm. I stopped the recording. Mr. Collins was now closing his folder. His hands were shaking. He stood up slowly. Mr. Carter, I think there has been a significant misunderstanding regarding your sister's capacity. I cannot be a party to this. Sit down, Dylan shouted, slamming his hand on the table. He turned on me, his face twisting into a mask of rage. You little bitch. You set me up. That recording is illegal. You cannot record people in their own home without consent. It is my home. Dylan, I said, my voice rising to match his. And Colorado is a one-party consent state. But even if it wasn't, I have plenty more. I have the bank records you thought I couldn't read. I have the emails you intercepted. I have the job offer from Seattle that you shredded. That is lies, Dylan screamed. He was losing control. The facade of the caring brother crumbling to reveal the desperate, greedy child underneath. You are unstable. You are having a psychotic break. Mom, tell him. Tell the lawyer she's crazy. Mom was weeping openly now, rocking back and forth. I didn't know, she moaned. I didn't know he was taking the money. You knew enough, I snapped at her. You knew they were going to lock me away. You knew they were going to sell Evan's house, and you sat there and ate quiche while they planned my burial. It was for your own good, Dylan yelled. You are useless. You sit around all day crying over a dead man. You are a drain on this family. I was trying to save us. You were trying to rob me, I said calmly, and you failed. You have no proof that holds up, Dylan sneered, trying to regain his footing. It is your word against mine, and I have 3 doctors who will testify you are incompetent. Actually, a deep voice came from behind me. We have quite a bit more than that. The door to the study opened. Martin Rhodes stepped out. He was not wearing his grandfatherly cardigan. He was wearing a sharp charcoal suit, and he looked every inch the shark he was known to be in the courtroom. Behind him stood a videographer, holding a camera that was pointed directly at Dylan. Dylan's face went white. All the blood drained from it, leaving him looking like a wax figure. Who the hell are you? Dylan demanded, though his voice wavered. I am Lena Carter's attorney, Martin said, walking into the room and placing a heavy briefcase on the dining table. And you, Mr. Carter, are in a phenomenal amount of trouble. Mr. Collins, seeing Martin Rhodes, audibly groaned. Martin, I didn't know you were on the ticket. Clearly, Martin said dryly. If you had known, you might have checked your client's story a little more thoroughly before drafting a fraudulent power of attorney. Dylan looked from Martin to me, and then to the camera. He realized the trap hadn't just sprung, it had crushed him. This is entrapment, Dylan spat. You lured me here. We invited you to a lunch to sign papers you prepared, Martin countered. Everything you said was voluntary. Everything you admitted to was recorded. And by the way, that camera in the chandelier? It has a lovely view of you trying to coerce a woman you believe to be disabled into signing away her estate. Dylan looked up at the light fixture. He looked back at me. The hate in his eyes was palpable, but beneath it, there was terror. You think you are so smart, Dylan hissed at me, but you can't prove I took the money. That was management fees. We can prove you spent $24,000 of charitable donations on a condo down payment, Martin said, opening his briefcase and pulling out a file. We can prove you leased a BMW in Lena's name, and we can prove you perjured yourself on the guardianship application filed with the court. Martin tossed the file onto the table. It slid across the wood and hit Dylan's chest. I suggest you get a real lawyer. Dylan, I said, my voice steady, my heart pounding with the thrill of justice. Because Mr. Collins looks like he's about to run for the door. And indeed, Mr. Collins was already packing his bag, muttering about a conflict of interest. Dylan stood there, cornered, exposed, and utterly defeated. The silence in the room returned, but this time, it wasn't the silence of my deafness. It was the silence of a gavel coming down. Martin Rhodes did not shout. He did not need to. He possessed the kind of quiet, terrifying authority that comes from 40 years of destroying arrogant men in courtrooms. He walked to the table and dropped the heavy briefcase with a thud that vibrated through the wood, right next to the trembling hands of Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, Martin said, his voice smooth and cold. I assume you drafted this power of attorney based on the information provided by your client. Did Mr. Carter inform you that he has already misappropriated $24,000 from a charitable fund established for his sister, or that he has been commingling estate assets with his personal gambling accounts? Mr. Collins turned a shade of pale, usually reserved for fish bellies. He snatched the papers back from the center of the table. I was told the funds were for medical necessities, he stammered, looking at Dylan with betrayal in his eyes. I was told the sister was catatonic. As you can see, Martin said, gesturing to me. Ms. Carter is quite alert, and she has retained me to audit every single penny her brother has touched. Martin opened the first folder. He laid out the bank statements like tarot cards predicting a disaster. Here is the withdrawal for the condo down payment, Martin narrated, pointing to the highlighted line. Here is the lease agreement for the BMW M5, and here is the transfer of $6,000 to a Dr. Aris 3 days before he signed an affidavit claiming Lena was incompetent. Dylan stood up, his chair tipping over backward with a loud crash. This is bullshit. Those were loans. I was going to pay them back once the house sold. I am the one taking care of her. I deserve a salary for managing this mess. It is not a salary, Dylan, I said, my voice cutting through his shouting. It is theft. You stole from a widow. You stole from your own sister. I saved you, Dylan screamed, his face turning a blotchy, violent red. You were rotting in this house. I gave up my life to move in here. Martin reached for his laptop. Let us hear about that sacrifice, shall we? He hit a key. The audio filled the room, clearer and louder than it had been on my phone. It was a recording from 2 weeks ago, Dylan talking to his friend on speakerphone while I was supposedly asleep upstairs. Bro, it is the easiest money I have ever made. She is a vegetable. I sign a few papers, dump her in the ward, and the house is mine. I am looking at a $2 million payout for babysitting a mute for 6 months. The silence that followed was heavy. Mr. Collins began shoving papers into his briefcase with frantic, jerky movements. I am leaving, Mr. Collins announced. Mr. Carter, do not contact my office again. I will be reporting this breach of ethics to the Bar Association myself to get ahead of the fallout. You can't leave, Dylan shouted, grabbing Mr. Collins's arm. We have a deal. Mr. Collins ripped his arm away and practically ran out the front door. We heard his car start and peel away seconds later. Dylan turned back to us, breathing hard, his eyes wild. He looked at Mom. Do something. Tell them. Tell them I am the guardian. Mom was weeping into her hands, her shoulders shaking. I didn't know, she sobbed. I didn't know about the condo. I just wanted her safe. Martin turned his gaze on her. It was not sympathetic. Mrs. Carter, ignorance is not a defense when you are an accessory to stripping a citizen of their civil rights. You signed the affidavit supporting the guardianship. You agreed to place your daughter in a locked facility against her will, not because she needed it, but because it was convenient. That will be part of the record. Mom looked up, her face streaked with mascara. She looked at me, pleading. Lena, please, we are family. Family doesn't lock family in a cage, I said. Family doesn't steal their future. I stood up and smoothed down the front of my suit. I felt tall. I felt powerful. I am officially revoking any and all permissions I have ever given you. Dylan, I said, enunciating every word. I have already met with the bank. The joint account is closed. The insurance money, the $1.2 million you were drooling over, has been moved to a trust you cannot touch. And the house? It is not for sale. It never was. Dylan looked like he had been punched in the gut. You moved the money? Yesterday, Martin confirmed. While you were busy picking out furniture for your new bachelor pad, Lena was securing her assets. You have access to nothing. Zero. You selfish bitch! Dylan lunged toward me. The videographer stepped forward, but he didn't need to. Martin didn't flinch. Sit down. Mr. Carter, Martin barked, unless you want to add assault to the list of felonies we are compiling. Dylan stopped, his hands clenching and unclenching. He looked at the camera, then at Martin, and finally realized the walls had closed in completely. You can't do this, Dylan hissed. I have rights. I have residency here. Actually, Martin said, pulling a final document from his briefcase, you don't. He slid a paper across the table. It had a court seal at the top. This is an emergency order of protection, Martin explained. Granted this morning by Judge Harrison, the same judge you were hoping would sign the guardianship papers. We presented him with the evidence of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. He was not amused. Martin tapped the paper. This order grants Lena exclusive possession of the residence. It prohibits you from coming within 500 feet of her or her finances, and it orders you to vacate the premises immediately. You are kicking me out? Dylan whispered. This is my house, too. It is not your house, I yelled, finally letting the anger break through the surface. It is Evan's house. It is my house. You were a guest. Dylan, a guest who tried to steal the silver. It should have been mine, Dylan screamed back, losing all control. I am the son. I am the one who is supposed to build the legacy. Evan was a nobody. He died and left you a fortune, and you are just wasting it sitting here in the dark. I could have done something with that money. I deserved it. The confession hung in the air. I deserved it. It wasn't about care. It wasn't about safety. It was about entitlement. He believed that my tragedy was his lottery ticket. And there it is, Martin said quietly. The motive. He looked at Dylan with cold finality. You have 24 hours to remove your personal effects. An officer from the sheriff's department is parked down the street. He will escort you while you pack. If you are not gone by noon tomorrow, you will be arrested for trespassing and violation of a court order, and given the fraud investigation that is about to open, I suggest you do not give them a reason to take you in early. Dylan looked at Mom. Are you going to let her do this? Mom looked at me. She saw the scar behind my ear. She saw the resolve in my eyes. She saw the daughter she had underestimated. I think, Mom whispered, her voice trembling, you should go pack, Dylan. Dylan let out a sound of pure frustration, kicked the chair out of his way, and stormed out of the room. We heard him stomping up the stairs, followed by the slamming of the guest room door. Martin sighed and closed his briefcase. Well, that went about as well as could be expected. Thank you, I said to him. Thank you for listening when no one else would. It was my pleasure, Lena, Martin said. Evan would have been proud of you today. He signaled to the videographer to cut the feed. We will keep the sheriff nearby until he is gone. Locking the doors tonight might be wise. I will be fine, I said, and I meant it. By the next afternoon, the house was empty. Dylan had left, taking his clothes and his resentment with him. Mom had gone with him, unable to face me, choosing to enable him one last time. I stood in the living room. It was quiet. I walked over to the stereo system that Evan had installed. I hadn't touched it in 3 years. My fingers brushed the dust off the volume knob. I selected a playlist, classic jazz, Evan's favorite. I turned the volume up. The sound of a saxophone filled the room. It was rich, warm, and complex. It bounced off the walls and vibrated in the floorboards. I closed my eyes and just listened. I heard the wind chimes outside. I heard the hum of the refrigerator. I heard my own breathing. I wasn't lonely. I was free. I walked over to the camera I had set up on the tripod for my new project. I looked directly into the lens. For 3 years, I thought my silence was a weakness, I said, speaking to the future audience of the channel I was about to launch. I thought I was broken because I couldn't hear the world, but I learned that the most dangerous thing isn't being deaf. It is listening to the wrong people. I paused, a small smile playing on my lips. They thought they were managing a victim. They didn't realize they were creating a witness. If you ever feel like people are writing your story for you, remember this: you can always take the pen back. Sometimes, you just have to wait for the right moment to speak. I reached out and turned off the camera. I walked to the window and opened it. The cold winter air rushed in, biting and fresh. I could hear a siren in the distance and the laughter of kids playing down the street. The world was loud, and it was mine. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below and tell me where you are listening from. I would love to know how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people who might need to hear it. Stay safe and never let anyone silence you.